Socialism promises to cure poverty, but it doesn't. Let's find out why. Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Thank you for bearing with me the last couple of weeks. We are back to a normal schedule this week. This episode is coming out Monday. I will have something out by Wednesday morning and an episode of Pointed for you on Friday. Our speech tournament went well. Always excited to see kids get up there, and as someone who's helping run everything, glad all the postings got up. So just a reminder, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows, youtube.com/@sharpening-arrows. If you want to see me instead of just hear me, that's the place to do it. Now my son and my daughter are not producing today. I have been forced to fire them. No, I'm just kidding. They've been doing great, but they've got some other stuff to do. So, unfortunately, any errors, any technical mistakes are all my own fault today. All right. So, if you listened to our show last week, we asked this question. We looked into this topic of wealth inequality. Why are there poor people in the world's richest country? It's a really important topic to talk about because there is a major push for socialism happening in the U.S. today. And parents, it's not enough for us to know why socialism fails. We have to teach our children this, because what's happening for teens and young adults is they're hearing people like Bernie Sanders. This is what he said a couple of weeks ago. We're living in the richest country in the history of the world, right? He's correct about that. All right, you tell me why we're the only nation not to guarantee health care to all people, the only nation not to guarantee paid family and medical leave, why we have a $7.25 an hour minimum wage, why we have 800,000 people sleeping on the street. Why are there poor people in the world's richest country? Now, if you are a regular listener to the show, you know normally I make the arguments for the side that I disagree with, and then debunk those arguments, and then make the case for the side that I do agree with. Last episode, in my failed attempt to keep the episode under 20 minutes, I ran out of time. And so I only debunked Bernie's spread the wealth arguments. And so if you want to listen to that portion of the show, you're going to need to go and check out the last episode. But now I want to talk about why socialism doesn't work, why it doesn't solve poverty like its adherents claim. And you've got to listen to the full episode, because I make Bernie's arguments and then I talk about the problems with them. But before we get into it, I do want to acknowledge, and again, the full treatment of this is in the last episode. You can temporarily make Paul richer by robbing Peter, but doing so is not going to produce an economic system that creates wealth. On Tuesday, socialist Zohran Mamdani is likely to become the mayor of New York City, the country's biggest city. He is an open socialist who has promised to impose his socialist schemes to cure poverty. Let's have a pause point right here. Parents, I encourage you to stop the podcast and discuss with your teenager this question. Which of the great 8 would you use to make the case against socialism? Now, the great 8 questions are questions that we put in our mental toolbox that we use to examine issues, because we don't know everything. And so we have these questions just in mind as tools to examine and think about things. Question 1, what happens next? Question 2, has this been tried before? Question 3, is there a principle involved? Question 4, what are the trade-offs? Question 5, what do you mean by that? Question 6, is this an appeal to emotion or logic? Question 7, am I focused on the speaker or the argument? And question 8, what does the Bible say? All right, you've got your question. Which one would you ask as we tackle this topic? Again, there's not a right or wrong answer. You can approach it in many different ways. The question that I'm going to focus on today for the whole episode is question 2. Has this been tried before? And the nice thing about this question is that if someone says something and then you can go back into the past or a different location, you can actually see what has happened. You don't have to have the best intellectual understanding. You don't have to have all the arguments. You can just say, you said we should do this. They did that. Here's what happened. And socialism is not a new idea. It has been tried lots of places before. This is from the Manhattan Institute, talking about Venezuela. There are 3 main policies implemented by Hugo Chavez, who took over Venezuela in 1999, that produced the current crisis. This is from the mid-2010s. There was widespread nationalization of private industry, currency and price controls, and the fiscally irresponsible expansion of welfare programs. Again, this is from the Manhattan Institute. We're just going to talk about the first and the third of those, the nationalization of private industry and the expansion of welfare. One of Chavez's first actions was to start nationalizing the agriculture sector, supposedly reducing poverty and inequality. Oh, does that sound familiar? By taking from rich landowners to give to poor workers. Oh, that's Zohran's plan. That's Sanders' plan right there. From 1999 to 2016, his regime robbed more than 6 million hectares of land from its rightful owners. All right, let's have a pause point. Do you think food production increased or decreased? Chavez took from the rich and he gave to the poor. What happened next? Again, from the Manhattan Institute. As economic theory predicted, as state control of the agricultural industry increased, Venezuela's food production fell 75% in 2 decades, while the country's population increased by 33%. This was a recipe for shortages and economic disaster. Did you see that? Someone else in Venezuela tried what Bernie and Zohran are promising to do, are saying that we should do to reduce inequality. And you could say in a way they did reduce inequality because almost everyone became desperately poor because there was simply less stuff to spread around. But that's not quite what they promised, is it? So let's have a pause point. Why did food production decrease? I'm going to suggest there's 2 reasons here. One, you took the resources away from the people who actually knew how to turn that land into crops. Okay, this is a really important thing to understand. And again, this goes back to the discussion we had in the last episode about, do we live in a world of plenty or scarcity? We actually live in a world of scarcity where there's not enough stuff. And we need people who have the knowledge of how to take farmland and what to do to produce crops. Because crops don't just happen. And even if some crops will happen, the yield will go down. The amount that land produces will go down if it's not stewarded well. So you drove off, you took the property away from the people who actually knew how to farm. And then the second thing is there's not as much incentive for the people who took over to work hard. Think about what it's like to be a farmer. You wake up early every day and you go out and you work hard. And why do people do this? They do it to make money. And if you take away someone's ability to make money from doing something, they're going to do less of it. And what happened in Venezuela is no surprise. Food production fell by 3/4. All right, from the Manhattan Institute. After agriculture, the regime nationalized electricity, water, oil, banks, supermarkets, construction, and other crucial sectors. And in all these sectors, the government increased payrolls and gave away products at low cost. Wow. Does that sound familiar? I mean, this is Bernie Sanders' plan right here. And what was the result? Days-long countrywide blackouts, frequent water service interruptions, falling oil production, and bankrupt government enterprises. They tried socialism. They tried Bernie's plan, and people suffered because there simply wasn't as much stuff to spread around. Because socialism doesn't produce more stuff, it just takes from the people who do the producing and gives it to people who aren't producing, and you give that 20 years and there's a lot less stuff to spread around. All right, this is a little later from the Manhattan Institute. The socialist regime also implemented price ceilings. Price ceilings, that's rent control on hundreds of basic products such as beef, milk, and toilet paper. At artificially low prices, more people were willing to buy these products, but the few private factories left that were not nationalized could not profit at the government cap price, so they reduced or halted their production. Instead of benefiting the poor, price ceilings predictably resulted in shortages that forced Venezuelans to stand in lines for hours, while supermarket employees and the well-connected obtained the products they needed. I just want you to see the parallels there between what the socialists in America push. Oh, you can't afford that? We're going to cap how much you pay for it. That's going to solve all your problems. And again, in the immediate term for a certain subset of people, that is an actual benefit. But if it continues to go on, if at an artificially low price, the demand goes up, but the production goes down because the reason people work is to make money. And if they can't make money, they're going to do less and you're going to have shortages. Because again, we go back to that principle, right? That's question 3 of the grade 8. Is there a principle involved? Well, we live in a world of scarcity where if we don't have a system that allows people to manage stuff well, that incentivizes them to work, they're going to work less and they're going to produce less and there's going to be less stuff to spread around. All right. And this is from Manhattan Institute talking about Venezuela. But perhaps the most harmful part of the Venezuelan socialist project is the part that the international media and leftist figures used to praise most frequently: welfare programs. The socialist regime created social missions aimed at tackling poverty, illiteracy, healthcare, and more. All right, let's have a pause point. Did you see any parallels between those programs and what the socialists in America want to create? They want to end poverty. They want to end illiteracy. Think pre-K, universal child care, health care, right? Bernie talks about we don't have government-funded health care. All right, this is back to the Manhattan Institute. But despite enjoying higher government oil revenues due to a tenfold rise in oil prices from $10 a barrel in 1999 to more than $100 in 2008, just for context, Venezuela has a lot of oil. So this did increase the amount of money they made per barrel, which should have put the government in great shape to end poverty, to redistribute the wealth. But instead, this is from Manhattan Institute, the regime financed a growing deficit by printing more currency. We've mentioned this before, but what happens when you print more currency? Well, we'll find out. Expansive welfare programs and massive public works projects provided ever-growing opportunities for still greater corruption. Printing money to pay for endless state programs unsurprisingly led to high rates of inflation. Now, we haven't had inflation like Venezuela's had, but we also have had higher rates of inflation because the government keeps printing money to pay for its welfare programs. So I hope you see what happened here. The socialist leader came in and said, we're going to take the money from the rich and the government's going to pay for everything. And even though the price of oil increased tenfold, the government ran out of money because the demand for free stuff is unlimited because of corruption, because when there's not the corrective of the market, the corruption expands. And then they debased the currency. They printed more money, leading to inflation. All right, let's have a final pause point here. Have you ever been in a store that has run out of toilet paper? Why did that happen? Now, as a teenager, you may not have ever experienced that. I'm guessing your parents have, or at least the toilet paper at the cheap store has at Costco has run out, and I gotta go. Oh no, I gotta buy it at Vons or Albertsons where it's 3 times as much money. But it doesn't happen often in America. Oftentimes, right before an emergency or during the pandemic, at the very beginning of the pandemic, when people didn't know what was going to happen and everything was shutting down, well, guess what? We all wanted toilet paper. So we all went out and bought toilet paper. But the point is that in America, it only happens in certain rare occasions before some emergency that produces a dramatic spike in demand that wasn't foreseeable. But in Venezuela, running out of toilet paper became routine. This is from the Foundation of Economic Education, written by David Boaz. In 1990, I went to a Cato Institute conference in what was then still the Soviet Union. We were told to bring our own toilet paper, which was in fact useful advice. So again, Venezuela isn't the only country that's tried redistributionism, that's tried socialism, that's tried communism. You go back to the Soviet Union and look, the same thing happened. We apply question 2, has this been done before? Has this been tried before? And the Soviet Union didn't have enough toilet paper for visitors. All right, back to Boaz. Now, after only 16 years of Chavinista rule, Venezuela has demonstrated that the socialism of the 21st century, that's what Hugo called his socialism, is pretty much like socialism in the 20th century. Fusion reports, Venezuela's product shortages have become so severe that some hotels in that country are asking guests to bring their own toilet paper and soap, a local tourism industry spokesman said on Wednesday. It's an extreme situation, says Savnina Camacho, owner of a 20-room boutique hotel in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada National Park. For over a year, we haven't had toilet paper, soap, any kind of milk, coffee, or sugar. So we have to tell our guests to come prepared. There's something else we could do. We could simply reject socialism. We could look beyond the promises, look beyond the surface level, and look and see where this has been tried before and see the results. Socialism doesn't work. You've got to dig in beneath the surface. All right, there's a lot more to this topic, and next time we're going to look at why America is rich. So we've debunked the arguments for socialism. We've looked at the failure of socialism around the world, and I'm going to keep this episode under 20 minutes. Good job, me. But the reason we did that is I really only focused on one example of socialism's failure. If we had gone and dug deeply into all of socialism's failures, this episode would have been hours and hours and hours and hours. But next time, we're going to kind of complete the series here, and we'll look at what has made America rich. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review, subscribe on YouTube, and share it with your friends and Christian community. Help them train their teens in a biblical worldview. Be courageous like Charlie, stay sharp, and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.